I am Jennifer McGuffin. I'm the Chief Communications Officer for the law firm of Romanucci and Blandin, and it is my distinct pleasure to facilitate this presentation today for attorneys Ben Crump and Antonio Romanucci, both of whom have dedicated their careers to civil rights, particularly to bringing justice to Black Americans who have been victims of police misconduct. I think both Ben and Tony feel the time is right and the nation is ready, so we're going to walk through their recommendations and the rationale behind them. We'll take questions at the end. But before we do that, on behalf of this team, I want to thank two experts who contributed to the plan that we're recommending. One is police force expert Scott Defoe in Southern California. The other is police training and culture expert Jeff Alpert in South Carolina. All right, Ben, please take it away.
Thank you so much, Jennifer. And I want to say I'm so very gratified to all the hard work done by my office and Attorney Romanucci's office and others who contributed to this important conversation, because I have witnessed for the better part of my career observing police departments and police unions and the courts literally make it an art form at justifying the killing of Black people by police. I mean, they have come up with all kind of intellectual justifications and data. For instance, the excited delirium, which I think is, and Tony thinks is voodoo science, but it is accepted now in the courts when marginalized people are killed in police custody. And so this is very important that we put forth a model approach for comprehensive police reform and collect data and statistics to help those who endeavor to make the law be an instrument for good, to achieve justice and equality, and not be used as a weapon to oppress and discriminate. And so I'm just very thankful to work alongside my brother, a warrior in this legal battlefield, one of the best civil rights lawyers in America, and that is my partner, Tony Romanucci. And so I'll pass it to him about why he feels so passionate about what we're doing today.
Well, thank you so much, Ben. And you know how much of an honor I feel it is to work alongside you every day as we move across the country trying to solve its problems. I should tell you what inspired Ben and I to do this. It was tremendous work by our two offices that put together this white paper, and you're soon going to see a video that we want to introduce to you. But our inspiration finally was winning the White House back last month. And we realized that this could be one of our next best opportunities to change the curve, right? Bend the curve and change the conversation when it comes to the killing of innocent people in America, when it comes to the killing of unarmed Black people in America. Ben, I don't want to steal your thunder, and I don't know if you were going to say this, but I'll leave it as an open question. How many unarmed Black people do you think have been killed in America since George Floyd? We'll answer that question later. So I'm here today because I'm a sole member of the Whatever It Takes movement. I formed the organization 5 years ago, and as far as I know, I'm still the only member. I want people to join the Whatever It Takes movement to make sure that we get good, appropriate, and right policing in this country that preserves life instead of taking it needlessly. So I'm going to turn it back to Ben, and we're going to be back for more conversation very soon.
Thank you, Tony. And I too would be a charter member of the Whatever It Takes Coalition. As we began talking about this model approach to comprehensive police reform, we look back at the tragic deaths of succession of Black Americans by police, many that were captured on video, galvanized protests across the nation and the world in 2020. It is just astonishing in the United States that police violence is a leading cause of death of young Black men. On average, unarmed Blacks are 3.5 times more likely to be shot by police than unarmed whites. This is not a new problem. Next slide. In 2020, Americans of all types took to the streets by the tens of thousands. I mean, multi-generational, multi-ethnic, multi-geographical, demanding police reforms, demanding greater accountability and transparency, and a transformation in the relationship between law enforcement and the communities that they serve. Next slide. A significant force in the emergence of this renewed social justice movement is the omnipresence of video. Can you imagine what the narrative would have been had the torture of George Floyd not been captured on video by that young 17-year-old student? Well, we don't have to imagine. Attorney Romanucci, we saw it. The police report that first day was that George was resisting arrest and that he died of natural causes. This is before anybody saw the 8 minutes and 46 seconds that Officer Chauvin knee was on his neck. God help us that we don't believe Black people when they say the police brutalized us, even when the cameras are not on. But we'll get to that later. Next slide. Civil justice movements have arisen in the past, yet failed to produce lasting, meaningful reform. To build trust between communities and police will require comprehensive change and a set of agreed upon federal standards. This is our moment. We have to take advantage of this moment. You know, the George Floyd Justice and Police and Accountability Act is something Tony and I, who represent the family of George Floyd, are very focused on. And so with these first 100 days, we want to make sure that we have all options on the table. As Tony said earlier, the whatever it takes coalition, so we won't see yet again another hashtag. Since George Perry Floyd was tortured to death on May 25th, 2020, 95 Black men and women have been killed by the police. And this is during a pandemic. Let that sink in, a time when we all supposed to be shut down. Everything is shut down except racism and discrimination of police interacting with marginalized people. Now we will watch this video that Tony and I have prepared that I think you will find very engaging to this issue.
We're seeing new body camera footage of the chilling moments after Taylor was shot dead by police officers in her home last March.
It's not gonna happen anymore. My mom is not a horrible person.
Deputy Brewer fired a single shot that hit Thomas in the chest, killing him.
All my blood, they flipping over in the grave. I mean that. God bless y'all, man. Stay on the ground. Let me up. Get the behind me.
Security cameras captured the moments as Rayford was punched, tased, and kicked as officers tried to get him into handcuffs.
What do you want?
I can breathe. Please, in the name of it.
Video from the scene shows Peroni kneeling on Oscar's neck and head.
You'll see the same tactics that was used on George Floyd was used on my son Oscar.
Officers pinned Smith face down with a knee in his back for about 4 minutes.
Surveillance video shows Crutcher being shot as he walked away from Shelby with his hands in the air.
Family members and activists call the shooting of 29-year-old Dijon Kizzy an execution and an unjustified use of deadly force.
It is still very difficult to watch these videos, especially when you think Oscar Grant and David Smith were killed while they were restrained, face down, and then to see over a decade later with George Floyd, it's still happening. And what do we have to do to prevent restrained, handcuffed Black men for still being defined as a threat by the police where they have to use deadly force? I turn it over to Attorney Romanucci.
Thank you, Ben. You know, what's sad about that video is that we're only scratching the surface. And I would challenge anybody to try and mimic that video with white people. I think it's impossible to do, because all we're doing is showing you a microcosm of what's happening in this country and what has happened. Two of those incidents that we showed you in the video were very close to home. One of them right here in my hometown of Chicago, the other one nearby in Kenosha. Both instances where young Black kids were moving away from police and they were shot. And if you remember, the beginning of the video said that for some reason, and it's true, there is a sociological reasoning to this, that police officers are inherently afraid of Black people. That has to change, because I will tell you, living in the city for as long as I have, Black people are not afraid of police officers, but they have become afraid of them because of the mistrust. And I know that young Black children want to learn, they want to succeed. I think on this Zoom call is my dear friend, Franklin Vanderbilt. He wants to bring a school into the city of Chicago to bring out the best in young Black children so that they can grow and be the people that they want to be. And that model should not only be for Chicago, right, Ben? It should be for Tallahassee. It should be for Atlanta, Georgia. It should be for Los Angeles. It should be for New York City. People should learn to be who they want to be. They should be taught who they want to be. That's why the time is now. That's why we all must do whatever it takes. Because if we lose this moment, I don't know when we're going to capture it again. And we will just default back into a society of institutional and systemic racism. And that's not where I want to continue to live my years. I don't want my children to be a part of it, or my grandchildren. So what must we do? Well, we have to change policing standards. We have to start at the core of what police officers do, and that's when they are trained. If we don't begin with the training of police officers, then we will fail, because it's very hard to detrain police officers from what they know now. We need to train new police officers in the correct methods of policing. And one of those is really, if we're going to start looking at it, we need to have national standards on training. By having national standards on training, we eliminate the 8,000 or 9,000 municipalities across the country that have their own standards. So reasonableness, which is a standard by which police officers are governed by, changes from city to city, county to county, state to state, and from circuit court to circuit court. So we have different standards of reasonableness when it comes to policing. We need to nationalize those standards. We need to license police officers. I went and got my hair cut a few days ago, and my barber has a license on the wall that says that she is licensed to perform hair cutting services. The same should be true for police officers who not only carry a gun, but carry a taser, batons, mace, and other sorts of weapons. They carry long guns at times. You see in the instance of Breonna Taylor, and you look at the recent raid that happened in the city of Chicago, which preceded Breonna Taylor. How this woman wasn't killed is a blessing, probably because she had just come home from work and was in a well-lit room and was naked, and they didn't see a weapon. That's what probably preserved her life. If she was in her bedroom with the lights off, she was probably a dead woman. So until we get a nationalized policing standard, we will continue to see Black people fall at the hands of police officers at the rate that Ben talked about. That number of 95 is about once every other day. That's so unacceptable. Needless death. Every one of those is a chance at life that has now gone. So that's what we need to do, is we certainly need to establish national standards. And this is a radical idea, but Ben and I are on the same page on this. We need to abolish qualified immunity. We need to stop giving police officers the get out of jail free card that they have, which gives them a pass if they felt, or if there's an opinion that their standards and their actions were reasonable and they were within the established law at that time. If they didn't know it was within the established law, then there's a chance. But if the law was established, then they get the get out of jail free card. So we are very passionate about this because we need to make serious change, and without serious change, we won't preserve life. Hand it back to Ben.
Thank you, Tony. And I thank you, Lee, right into an important aspect of the conversation, and that is accountability and transparency. You know, far too often in the Black community, we see that the police, with little or no evidence at all, always arrest and hold us accountable. But yet when we see police on video doing things that are inappropriate, it's almost like Tony said, they have this qualified immunity where they're still not held accountable. So it creates a great mistrust between communities of color and law enforcement. And so what we really have to have is transparency plus accountability. And that's how we can start to try to bridge this divide of mistrust. Law enforcement officers are public servants and employees and should be accountable for their actions. I mean, they're public servants. The public should receive full transparency. One of the things I think is the most asinine thing ever is to ask taxpayers to pay all this money for body cam videos and dash cam videos so it can be transparent. But as we saw in Laquan McDonald in Chicago and so many other cases, the police say, well, there's an ongoing investigation and they won't release the video. It's two justice systems in America, because we know if it's an African-American who's on video doing something inappropriate, that video is released that same day or the next day, and it's all over the evening news, all over cable news. But when the police shoot a Black man in the back, when the police choke a Black person, when the police raid the wrong house, they don't want to release those videos. It got to be about transparency. Investigations into police misconduct are often carried out by police themselves, limiting objectivity. There is no collective database on police shootings or deaths anywhere in the country. We have to guess at how many people they kill every year in America. The newspapers do more work than the government at keeping that important data that's taking the lives of our children. And that's just unbelievable when you think about this pandemic of this police brutality and excessive force. Here are the recommendations, and we've given a lot of thought to this. Creation of a national police accountability oversight task force to set consistent standards. And please move to the next slide. A permanent public national database of officer misconduct to provide transparency and consistency. Joshua Feast was number 95, Attorney Romanucci, shot in the back. The officer that shot him, Officer Jose Santos, in 2013 was caught on video beating unmercifully this unarmed black man along with his partners. And they were kicking him, punching him, putting his head in underwater in Galveston Beach, Texas. And he was allowed to resign. And then he goes right across the county line and gets another job at another police department. And now we see just last week, he shoots Joshua Feast, a defenseless black man running away from him, in the back. And the same is with 12-year-old Tamir Rice. I mean, the officer had been forced to resign 6 months earlier because they said he was unfit to be a police officer. He then goes 30 miles up the road to Cleveland, gets a job, and in 2 weeks, he shoots Tamir Rice at 1.7 seconds on video. And so we have to have this national database. The uniform reporting standards by agencies to generate reliable data and understand the trends in policing. Uniform use of body-worn cameras and policies to provide documentation of citizens' encounter with police officers. And this is important. Intentionally turning off a body-worn camera should be a federal obstruction of justice violation with a rebuttable presumption of guilt for officers who turn off body cameras in a case involving a citizen's death or catastrophic injury. I mean, we're not saying the police lose their due process rights, but it should be a rebuttable presumption that you did something illegal or nefarious if that body camera isn't on and you kill somebody or paralyze somebody or devastatingly injure somebody. Because Black people, we live every day in America under a rebuttable presumption. You think about George Floyd pleading mercifully to that police officer that I'm not that type of guy. I'm a good guy. That's Black people existence every day in America when they have an encounter with a police officer. So we have to do something different if we want different results. And of course, we need to get rid of qualified immunity, as Tony Romanucci so ably articulated it, because that is the intellectual justification that says all you got to do is say 3 little words when you kill a Black person. I felt threatened. And that's it. It doesn't work so well with white people, but it works pretty good when they kill Black people. Attorney Romanucci, sometimes you get emotional when you talk about this stuff.
Well, of course, Ben, because we live this with our clients that we never get to talk to. We never get a chance to talk to the dead people. We only get to talk to the families who talk about what they were and what they could have been. So some of the other proposals that we are looking at, I think we already discussed, is standardizing and professionalizing policing with licensing. You know, that is something that is unquestionable in terms of what we need. We need oversight over what they do. They need education, continuing education. Many times, I cannot tell you, I have been in depositions with police officers, and when you look at their training, all they tell you their training are looking at computer modules And if they click that they've completed the computer module, that satisfies their training. That's not the way that I know that I'm to be trained if I'm supposed to learn something. It's called rehearsal, it's muscle memory, and passing a test. It's not clicking a button on a computer module saying that you've completed the task. And that right now, ladies and gentlemen, is what police training is after you leave the academy. Most of it is based on computer modules, and very little of it is real life training. We could have the next slide, please. The other thing that we need to do, we're talking about some of the recommendations here, is certainly that we need to identify, for example, police officers that should not be police officers as a result of their psychological or emotional fitness. There are too many times where police officers commit too many of the excessive force claims that we see across the country. Now, that number may sound astonishingly low to you. It's about 4 to 5% of police officers probably should not be police officers, but they account for nearly half of the claims that we see for excessive force and deadly force across the country. So that's why it's so important to really, you want to skim them off the top, because by doing so, you automatically make our streets so much safer. Because of this inherent fear of Black people, white police officers and Black police officers make unqualified assumptions about activities that Black people are doing on the streets, and right away they equate that into crime. For example, when you look in Chicago, the stop and frisk policy that was in place for years here, where 73% of Black people accounted for the stop and frisks in Chicago, when they account for 27% of the population. Why? Because there is no good reason. Next slide, please. With regard to reframing the role of police, well, nearly every squad car that I see says to serve and protect. Well, that's what we need to do. They need to serve the community to preserve life and not take it, especially when it comes to the mentally ill. We call them also, as they're known, the term of art is EDPs, which stands for emotionally disturbed person. An emotional disturbance can be a temporary one. It can be transient. It can be long-term. It can be chronic. It can be because somebody had too much to drink for one night. You don't need to be mentally ill to be an emotionally disturbed person, but certainly the mentally ill and the EDPs need to be protected because they're typically not dangerous. They act abnormally, and police officers are taught to accept abnormal behavior as dangerous behavior, and very typically they end their life as opposed to preserving it. So we want to make sure that life is preserved. Another way of doing that is by demilitarizing the police. That is not defunding the police. You are taking away the armored vehicles and all of the gear that they wear when they go for example, execute warrants. You want to establish a level of trust in the community with the police officers. That's why community policing is so important. Next slide, please. So not only do we want to preserve life, but some of the recommendations are developing a curriculum in de-escalation, right? Because whether you're an EDP or mentally ill or not, you still need to de-escalate in order to preserve life. So the training in de-escalation not only should start in the academy, but requires a lot of in-person training on the department also, because you need to teach how to de-escalate, how to communicate, how to ensure that the resources on scene are appropriate for de-escalation. For example, officers trained in CIT, which is crisis intervention training. If an officer is certified in crisis intervention training, that officer typically gives that individual the best chance at survival, so that their movements or their words are not interpreted to be threatening, where then they can use the excuse. Because I no longer see qualified immunity as a defense, it's become an excuse. Because all they have to say is that I was in fear for my life, and they shouldn't be able to escape liability or culpability for shooting somebody that's unarmed. Ben, I think I'm turning it back to you right now.
No, thank you so much, Tony, for breaking it down. But really, this is about not losing this moment and taking action. I have to tell you all about something that I thought was quite extraordinary. Um, After George Floyd was killed, I had already been giving speeches about social justice around America and what we need to do. About a month after George Floyd, on Juneteenth, the Truist Bank, the bank that merged, became created when BB&T and SunTrust merged together, making them, I think, the seventh largest bank in America. They invited me to have a fireside chat with their CEO, Kelly King. And in introducing me, Tony, he said something profound why he wanted to have me there and have their 20,000 bankers and associates on the Zoom call. He said he's an older conservative white man, successful, lives in the suburbs. And he said after George Floyd, he got a knock on his door from one of his neighbors, another older white conservative man in their conservative community. And he said to Kelly King, that's the CEO, he said, Kelly, man, do you see what's going on out there? People are protesting in the streets. People are marching. I mean, cities on fire. He said that we got to call somebody. It's getting bad out there. And Kelly said he looked at his friend and he thought to himself, I don't know somebody's name. I don't know somebody's phone number. And I don't know somebody's address. And so Kelly said after another moment of reflection, while he looked at his friend, he concluded that we're the somebodies who have to do something. We're the somebodies who have to come up with a solution to this problem. And we can't just call it a Black issue. This is an American issue. And we all have a role to play, as Martin Luther King said, in the struggle for equality in America. And so that's why Attorney Romanucci, who I'm blessed to work with on these important matters, we're calling on everybody, federal lawmakers, my dear friend Kamala Harris and President Biden, they have to lead from the top. But we need our congressional members, we need our community partners, whether that are business leaders, educational leaders, health care providers. We certainly need the police at the table. We need everybody's buy-in to this, because we got to make it plausible and reasonable that everybody says this is fair. This is fair to everybody. And believe you me, we have never asked that the police get anything other than due process of the law. But we also want that for Black people too. And we need our legal leadership in the field of law, the people who know these issues more profoundly than anybody else, like a Tony Romanucci and so many other great civil rights lawyers in America. We need to be at the table helping to lead this conversation so we can finally try to prevent some of these hashtags from happening, because our children are dying. And I'm part of Tony's Whatever It Takes coalition, because enough is enough. It is not acceptable. And so we calling everybody to action. Let's don't lose this moment, brothers and sisters. Skin color, we have to get in America's mind. When we see people of different skin color, it is not something that should give way to hate. But when we see somebody of another skin color, it should give reason for us to celebrate as an opportunity to learn from somebody who's different from us, a different culture, a different background, a different life experience. And so if we can make this a societal issue, maybe the police officers who are part of society won't see Black people as criminal or dangerous or fear us. and shoot first and ask questions later. Tony Romanucci, I thank you from the bottom of my heart. Jennifer, I don't know what we do next.
I'd love to just ask Tony and Ben to talk a bit further. What do you think are the biggest obstacles to this change, and how can we work to address those?
Well, I think one of the biggest changes, you're going to talk about institutional memory. How difficult is it to change, the memory that police officers and communities have with regard to the horrors that have occurred not only here locally, but across the country. And I think one major step, Jen, one very important step, and Ben knows this so well, is that we must engage in new collective bargaining agreements with the unions. Because right now, it's my opinion that the unions have the foothold, they have the advantage when it comes to dictating how police officers act. And that's because, municipalities, because of budgets, have bargained away rights for money. And who suffers is the community. It may look good when that contract is signed, but right now you can see finally there is resistance. There's resistance in Minneapolis to a new union contract. There is resistance here in Chicago to a new police union contract. That's because there is now recognition that the unions have had, the police unions, I should say, have had the foothold, the toehold on this issue. And we need to straighten that curve. We need to balance it. It should be fair. It should be fair to the community as well as the police officers.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more, Tony. That's why it's so encouraging what we see happening across America with this election, what we saw in Georgia and so many other places where the people spoke up with their votes to say that we're voting for George Floyd, we're voting for Breonna Taylor, we're voting for Ahmaud Arbery, we're voting for Jacob Blake Jr., we're voting for all these unarmed people of color who have been killed in these unbelievable ways, because we think that we can make a better America, a more just America. That's what is encouraging. So the unions won't have the power. The people will have the power. And that's what we need. That's the only way we're going to solve this issue. People got to say, we want to have the law be an instrument for good. And I dare say, in my community, the Black community does not see the law as an instrument for good when our lives are affected.
Gentlemen, let me ask you a question. It's been implied through your comments, but confirm, please, that it didn't look like all of the protests this summer after George Floyd's death were enough. They weren't enough to change the behavior of police officers with the death rate, as you noted. Talk about that for a bit, and that's the rationale behind needing the federal government to step in with standards, correct?
Yeah, I defer to Tony initially.
So no, clearly George Floyd's death was not enough. If anything, it may have ignited, police officers in the wrong direction in terms of how to better police the communities that need us most. I've talked about for years and years about the tale of two cities, and Chicago is a great example of a tale of two cities. And until we integrate that city more, we're going to be the west side, the south side. Because if you're in Chicago, Ben, and if you say the west side of Chicago, automatically you're going to think you're going to lock in as to what that community looks like. Well, it shouldn't be that way, right? It shouldn't be that way. It should be, we should be talking about our city. So unfortunately, we thought that George Floyd's horrible, horrific, inhumane, undignified death would have been enough to signal change, but it hasn't done it yet. Just like how horribly Sandy Hook still hasn't brought us federal standards on gun control. I mean, if there was ever a time for change, it was Sandy Hook. We had impediments, we had hurdles, and I keep bashing my head up against the wall. Well, what are the impediments? Who are these people who don't want to preserve life. Who doesn't want to preserve a child's life when they send them away to grade school? Who doesn't want to preserve a life when a mom opens up her door and tells her son, come back before dark, or don't get in trouble, or you have to teach your child to always show your hands if you're in a car, because if you don't, a police officer will probably shoot you because you look dangerous because of your skin color. It's baffling to me.
Gentlemen, last question. We're not seeing any additional reporter questions in the queue, but let me play devil's advocate and say, why not just leave this to the states? Why not just tackle this on a local basis? Why do we need federal intervention and a federal standard? And the state versus White House was a big issue in the last 4 years, the push and pull between governors and the White House. What's changing and why?
I have one quick answer, and then I'll send it over to Ben. You look at how well the coronavirus pandemic was handled when the federal government said we're going to leave it to the states, because you had 50 different rules, right? And then the governors handed it off to the mayors. We need national standards. We need Joe Biden to come in and say, I'm going to put in a mask policy, right? We need somebody to take control and leadership. So that's why we need the federal government. Ben?
You know, on issues of race, you know, you just live long enough in this world, and you know that they are dealt with differently than most other things. I have often argued that even in my book, Open Season, The Legalized Genocide of Colored People, Tony, I just believe whatever the situation is, poor people of color get the most of injustice and the least of justice. My personal hero, Thurgood Marshall, said it like this, and maybe this is the best way to end this conversation, because when you get right down to it, the crux of the matter really is about having the law be for everybody, equal justice under the law. And Justice Marshall said on the 200-year celebration of the founding and signing of the United States Constitution, and he was criticized for even saying this, and this is in 1976. And I don't know if we've changed much our mentality since that time, but Justice Marshall said, the basis of the American Constitution is simply this, that a Black baby born to a Black mother, the most uneducated Black mother, the most inarticulate Black mother, the most impoverished Black mother, has the same exact rights as a white baby born to a white mother, the most educated white mother, the most articulate white mother, the most affluent white mother, just by virtue of that baby drawing its first breath as an American. But Justice Marshall said, I know that is not the case in America today, but I challenge anybody to say that's not a goal worth fighting for. I challenge anybody to say that's not what makes America the great beacon of hope and justice for all the world to marvel. So when we fight for the George Floyds of the world, but more importantly, when we fight for the unknown George Floyds of the world, when we fight for who my grandmother called the least of these, using the biblical reference, what I believe we're doing, Attorney Romanucci, is fighting to make America live up to its creed. What we're doing is fighting to make America be that great beacon of hope and justice for all the world to marvel. But most importantly, what we are fighting for is to make America, America for all Americans.
Ben, you're my hero, and I know you're a hero to so many others in this country. You are an inspiration to us all.
Hey, God bless you, brother. You know how I feel about you. One of the best civil rights lawyers in America. And we're going to change this, Tony. We're going to change this. We got an opportunity, and we hope everybody will help us help this new administration have systematic reform in policing in America.
Thank you.
Thank you, gentlemen. And the white paper and the video that we shared with you today, they are both available for members of media. If you'd like them, please reach out to press@bencrump.com. Thank you so much for your time, and gentlemen, thank you both for your comments and your leadership. Good afternoon.
Thank you, Jen.
Thank you.
Bye, Ben.